Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some unique ways to use the spring felt collection from Spellbinders. This is a collection that accompanies the Fergus the Gnome collection that came out in the fall. So there is a 3D felt egg or 3D egg and flowers die set, as well as some spring embellishments die set. Now, I created Fergus in the fall. This is the Fergus that I created. I'll link that video at the end of this one. And I wanted to use these dies in ways that they weren't necessarily intended. I wanted to use them in some different ways and share some different ways to use them. So if you're wanting to create Fergus with these, you can check my video out at the end where I link the ones that I did in the fall. It's exactly the same method. You would just be using spring embellishments to decorate them. I also encourage you to check out Sandy McIver's videos on the Spellbinders channel. She's the one that designed this collection as well as the Fergus collection, and her videos for this collection are really great. They're done step by step, piece by piece, and she does a really great job with them. So more inspiration there, and she's done a bunch of these different gnomes, so there's a lot of different inspiration to go around. So for these, I've got all of these pieces die cut with some felt, and I'm using 3 different felt packages, if you will. I'm using some pieces from the classic Pooh felt collection, some from the neutral felt collection, and some from the holiday felt collection. Before creating my eggs, I want to stitch on my flowers. Now there's also some tulips as well as daffodils in this set that you could put on here. I opted to do these very simple flowers, and because of the size of them, I thought it worked better for me to put them on before I stitched my eggs together. So I'm starting with the flowers. I have them die cut out of some cream as well as some pink felt, and then from the embellishments collection I used the little button with the holes in it to do the centers to my flowers. So for each one of the egg sides here, I'm going to put the bigger flower towards the bottom, the smaller flower towards the top, and then I'm going to tie off my floss. And I'm using some pink floss here. This one's number 603, it's DMC. After I have done that off screen, I did the other 3 panels exactly the same way. And now I'm ready to add leaves to the flowers. So I have 3 leaves per panel. For the leaves, I'm going to put the larger one towards the bottom, the middle one towards the middle, and the top one towards the top. But for each one of these leaves, the bottom stitch, if you will, that is closest to the base of the leaf is the only one that's going to be stitched down to that egg. So then when it comes to stitching the sides, I can easily lift the tip of that leaf up so that it doesn't cover the holes that I want to stitch for those sides. So for that big leaf, I did all of the stitching except for that bottom stitch, and then I stitched it to the egg. And when I'm doing the stitching for these leaves, as well as all of the different sides for my egg, what I'm doing is a running stitch. So I'm going up one hole, down the next one, up the next one, and down the next one. And when I get to the end of the stitching line, if you will, I'm going back and filling all of those open. It looks like a continuous stitching line. When I start that stitching, I'm putting a knot in my floss, and then starting from the back side, doing that running stitch, coming back on the leaves, and then just stitching that bottom stitch, and I'm going over it twice just to make sure that it's nice and secure. Once I have all of my leaves down, I will put my thread floss to the back, I will do a knot, and then I will put a little bit of that white glue on there just to give it a little bit more security, and then set that aside to dry. All 4 of the sides of those eggs are done exactly the same way with the leaves in the same positioning. And then once I have all 4 sides done, I'll let the glue dry for a few moments just so that it has those floss pieces on the ends secure. Then I add a knot to some blue floss. Oh, sorry, the green floss that I used was number 320, again a DMC floss. That one, and then the blue one, I'm using 931. Now, when it came to stitching the flowers as well as the leaves, I did 2 strands of floss. For the stitching around the egg, I'm doing 3 strands. So it's just a little bit thicker, a little bit more prominent. It's really a personal preference thing. But for the sides of the egg, just like my leaves, I'm doing the running stitch. So I started in the back of the felt, so the inside of the egg, with a knot at the end of my floss so that it would be nice and secure. I wouldn't accidentally pull it out. And then I have some sewing clips here that are just holding the pieces or the edges together, making sure that those holes all line up. Now, when I die cut with the felt, I do go and I will flick the felt so those little bits, the hole bits, will sometimes pop out. If they don't pop out, I will pick, or I will use a die pick to poke them out. It's much easier if those felt bits are out, because then you can see all the way through. It makes the stitching just a little bit easier, and it's easier to line up those holes when you're stitching them. So just like the leaves, I did my running stitch all the way up to the top of the egg, and now I'm going to make my way down. And anytime I'm making my way down, I'm filling in all of the holes or all of the spaces that I left on my way up. So once I have finished and I'm on my way down, it's going to look like there's a continuous stitching line all the way through the top, and both the front and the back are going to look exactly the same. I'm going to do this exact same step for all 4 of the edges, or all 4 panels, stitching them together to create that egg. Now, when it came time for picking floss, I chose a shade that was a little bit darker than the felt that I was stitching. The only exception was for the flowers. I chose pink floss for all of them, because the center of the flower, that little button piece, it only had 1 stitch. So I thought a darker pink, but doing that same pink for all of them worked. Once I'm finished one line, rather than tie off my floss, I just put a stitch through the back of it to make my way to the next side of the panel. And then I'm going to do exactly the same as that first one. So I use those sewing clips to hold everything together to make sure those stitching lines are all together. And then I'm working my way up with a running stitch, and once I get to the top, I'm going to go all the way down. So I'm going to do most of this off screen because it's very repetitive. So now I have all 4 pieces together. I'm on my way up the last side of the egg. So I'm doing my running stitch starting at the bottom on my way up. When I get to the top, rather than making my way down right away, if you look at the top where those 4 panels meet, there's kind of a little bit of a hole. So what I end up doing is I'll get to the top stitch, then I will put my needle through the hole, just one down from that, go across to the opposite side, going through that top stitch and just pulling everything tight so everything meets nice and neatly in that center at the top. But because I'm going through the holes that are already there, I may be adding a little bit of floss to those stitches. You don't really see it though, because we're just tightening that top there. Once I have all 4 sides nice and tight how I want it, I can go right back to the panel that I was doing that running stitch on the way up, and I can fill in all the holes on the way down. Now there's a square die, well actually there's 2, for this set for the bottom of the egg to create a base to this egg. Now I'm doing the smaller of the 2 eggs. There's 2 different choices you could pick. You could pick a large egg or a small egg. I opted to do the smaller one, but if you wanted to do, say, a pair of them to complement each other, I think it would look really nice to do a small one and a large one. And these pieces here on that die set for the eggs, I'm using them on the eggs, but you could easily use them on Fergus as well to embellish his robe or his hat. The method for stitching that square base is exactly the same as the sides. You're going to match up the holes, and I'm just doing one side at a time. I'm going to go all the way around, but only doing one side at a time. So I'm not using those sewing clips to match up all of the sides. I'm just doing one at a time. It's going to be easier to match them up that way. Doing a running stitch. When I get about almost 3/4 of the way around, so almost to the end of the 3rd side, I'm going to take some stuffing and I'm going to stuff that egg. Once I have it stuffed as much as I want with some stuffing, I'm going to use some pearl barley. You can use whatever you want. You just want something that's heavy, that's going to give it a little bit of weight and help it to stand nice and sturdy with that weight. So I do the stuffing first, then I go in with that pearl barley. And then once I have it stuffed as much as I want, I'll do that running stitch toward, or to finish the bottom part, and then I will go back and fill in all those running stitch areas. So when it comes to stuffing it, I want to make it as firm as possible, or as full as possible. I don't want to just put a tiny little bit in there and have it really floppy, because you want that stuffing to be pushing towards the outside of that felt to make it full, to make it look more like an egg. So as I'm putting that stuffing in there, and I do a little bit at a time, I'm using my fingers to press it down as much as possible. And once I get to a point where I don't think I can fit much more in there, that's when I go and add that pearl barley. And like I said, I'm using pearl barley. I know there's something different that Sandy uses. I don't remember what it is. I want to say walnut shells crushed up or whatever. This is what I had in my house. This is what works for me. I didn't really need to go out and buy something special. I think rice would probably work. However, rice of course has that pointed edge. I chose the pearl barley because it's nice and rounded. You could even, I would assume, use like dried beans and that sort of thing. Just something, again, to give it a little bit of weight on the bottom. Once you're done stitching, you want to make sure to flatten out that bottom to make sure that it stands nice and sturdy on your surface. So once I have this filled as much as I want, I'm going to use that thread and do the rest of the running stitch to complete the fourth edge. And then I'm going to turn around and go all the way back, filling in all those running stitch pieces. So it's really, really easy to stitch. And I love the fact that there are already those stitching holes there. And that's part of what makes it so easy to do this. I think it would be much more challenging if it didn't have all of those stitching holes there and you had to try to match things together without being able to line it up nice and easy. The other thing with those stitching holes there, it makes it much easier for that needle to go all the way through the felt. I know when I've stitched felt where there hasn't been a stitching hole, it's a little bit harder to go through because these are rounded needles, so they don't go through felt quite as easily. I've also done, when I did my Fergus the Gnome, I did one with cotton. And again, anywhere where there was a hole, it was really easy. When it came time to stitching in an area that there wasn't a hole all the way through it, it was definitely a lot more challenging. But these are fun projects to create 3D items that you can use as home decor for spring, and just a fun, different way to create. When it comes to stitching items, like even the stitching dies in the clubs, they're the type of things that I think you could just sit and watch a movie while you're stitching these pieces together. And again, a different way of creating something unique that you can't find anywhere else. Once I've gone all the way around and filled in all of those running stitches, I put my needle through to the underside of one of those leaves, and then I just put a knot underneath there. Chances of someone lifting that leaf up to see that knot there are very slim. I also put a dot of glue and then put that leaf down. So that glue is really going to strengthen that knot. It's also going to glue that part of the leaf down to make it more secure. Now, just because this collection is made for felt doesn't mean you have to use it for felt. So I took the tulips from the 3D Eggs and Flowers die set, as well as the leaves and stems, and I cut them out of some cardstock. So I have the tulips there cut out of dahlia cardstock and wildberry cardstock, and I have the leaves die cut out of some rainforest cardstock. I always love giving things a little bit of extra shimmer using those interference inks. So I'm using the Magic Garden interference pad for those leaves, and then I'm using the fruit salad one for the tulips. So the Magic Garden, it is a nice bright green, but the interference color is purple. So when we tilt it into the light, we're going to get a little bit of a purple shimmer there. The fruit salad is like a corally pink color, but when we tilt it into the light, it's going to have a gold shimmer. And you actually see the gold shimmer a little bit more reflecting from the light as I'm doing the ink blending. When I dip it into my pad, I'll start where I want the ink darkest, and as there's less ink on my brush, I will move it up that piece there. So this is just going to give it some visual dimension. You could use regular inks to do this ink blending, but that shimmer that it gives it just gives it a little bit more visual interest as well as texture. For this stitching, I'm just using 2 layers or 2 strands of floss, and I'm going to stitch through those leaves. So you could leave it alone if you want, but because the stitching holes are there, why not add that little bit of detail? It's going to give a little bit more texture. Now for stitching on cardstock, I don't knot my floss. I use a little bit of Best Ever craft tape. I just trimmed it with a detailed scissors so that I have a little teeny tiny thin strip, and I use that to tape that floss in place at the bottom when I start. Then I do the running stitch all the way to the top of the stitching line, and then a running stitch all the way back, filling in those holes. So once again, just like the felt, it looks like a complete stitching line. There's no breaks in it. It goes through the whole thing. Once I've gone through the whole thing, I'm going to do that same thing as I started. I'm going to cut a tiny little strip of that Best Ever craft tape, tape the end of my floss down, and use my scissors to trim my floss, and then trim the tape around the outsides of the die cut if necessary. I did the rest of, or I'm going to do the rest of the stitching off screen. So it's exactly the same as that first leaf. They're all exactly the same. Now, my tulips here have 2 layers to them. There's one teardrop piece that gets glued to the front of it. So I'm just gluing all of that with some Best Ever craft or Barely Art glue. And I have it in a fine line bottle, so it works perfectly for little tiny die cuts as well as assembling larger pieces of the project. But liquid glue gives you that wiggle room to move and shimmy things in place. And it just makes it so much easier when creating because you can move everything when you need to or where you need to. For the sentiment for this card, as well as the next ones I'm going to be doing, I have a heat embossed sentiment here. It's a tiny sentiment from the Everyday Sentiment Strips 2 from Hero Arts. I used this recently in a video, so the sentiments I'm using for these cards are leftovers from that video. They were just heat embossed and then trimmed down. I used a trimmer to trim it down even more, and then to make it coordinate with my flowers, I used that fruit salad interference ink to ink blend on top of it. You could leave it on the white cardstock if you want, but the coral or the peachy pinky color is going to pop off of the card just a little bit better than that white. Then I'm ready to start gluing things to my card base. I'm gluing them straight to the card base. You could glue it to a separate piece and then create a mat around it if you wanted to frame it a little bit more. I'm using these for cards just to share a different way of using them or expand the ways that you can use them. Sometimes when you have a set that is intended for a certain purpose, sometimes some people can get it in their head that it can only be used that way, and that's definitely not the case. And they're just plain dies. They don't have to be used with felt. They can easily be used with cardstock. So you just want to look at shapes of things. So these are tulip dies. They're perfect for creating cards for spring, for adding to different, I think this would be fun as little gift tags. I'm going to be using or creating some little mini cards next after this. I think this would be great on those mini cards as well. You could do a single stem of a tulip, but by adding the stitching to the stems, it gives it a little bit of extra texture as well as that interference ink. Once I have my tulips down as well as the leaves, I just put down that sentiment at the base of the leaf so it hides the bottoms of the stems, and then let that glue dry completely. For the next 4 cards here, they're actually going to be like mini cards. I took 2 A2 card bases and I cut them in half. I'm doing these as vertical cards, but you could easily change a lot of them to create some horizontal cards if you want. You can even customize the size if you want. So these are going to be 2 3/4 inches by 4 1/4 inches on the front. I just wanted something a little bit different. I wanted some, because these shapes are smaller, I thought a regular A2 card was just going to be far too big for it. So I wanted to create something just a little bit unique. I'm using the same sentiment strips that I used for the last card, just pick some that would work with the different shapes from this particular set. So I have a bunch of hearts here. They are die cut from Dahlia cardstock, Wildberry cardstock, and Blush cardstock. The eggs there are die cut from some Breeze cardstock, and then we have some clover, some shamrocks die cut out of Rainforest cardstock, Peridot cardstock, as well as Fern cardstock. So I'm using interference inks to ink blend on them. So I'm using that Magic Garden on the greens. I used some Opal Blush on the blue eggs, and then I used some Fruit Salad on the hearts. And again, you could use a different type of ink for your ink blending, but I really love the shimmer that you get with those interference inks. It just gives something to catch the light as well as something to catch your eye when you're looking at them. The 4th card is going to be using the rainbows from this set. So when I created the rainbows, I did 3 of the white bases, and then all 3 strips get cut out of the same time. So I used some Dahlia cardstock for the pink, I used some Breeze cardstock for the blue, and I think it's Orchid cardstock Orchid or Violet that I used for the purple. And then because you get 3 of each color, you can create 3 rainbows with different in different order, if you will. So originally I thought I was only going to use 1 rainbow here, but I wanted to give it a little bit of shimmer. So I used the Natural Pearl ink pad from Lisa Horton Crafts. This has a white haze to it, but it's not a white pad, but it does give some beautiful shimmer to whatever you ink blend it on. Then I use that Fruit Salad interference ink on the sentiment for this particular card, just to give it a pop of color. Again, you could leave it white on that background, but it's just going to kind of get lost here. Another option for these cards would be to use a square die set to create some mats as well as to frame it in a little bit. I kept these super simple, so I didn't opt to do that, but you easily could. It would add a little bit more detail, a little bit more dimension to it. I created these as vertical cards, but because there's so many different hearts here, you could easily flip this card, creating a horizontal card and have, say, a line of hearts going across it. The same could be said for these shamrocks. When it comes to the shamrocks, we've got a lot of different sizes there as well as colors. You could easily do a line of shamrocks along a horizontal card as well. I kept it horizontal or vertical for these cards just for continuity so that all 4 of them would be the same orientation, but it's easy enough to change them up. So as I'm gluing these to my card base here, I'm trying to make sure that I don't have the same color heart right beside each other. I like when you cut these that you cut 3 sizes all at once, which is why I cut 3 different colors as well, so that there was a lot of variety between the sizes. Originally, I thought I was just going to pick 1 color per size and then just do a cluster of 3 hearts on this, but it just didn't seem to fill it out enough. So I thought using all of them and creating a cluster of hearts was a little bit more interesting to look at. The last step here is using some stickles. I'm just going to use them on a few of the hearts just to give it a little bit of extra sparkle and a little bit of extra texture. Once I have that done, I can set that aside to dry completely, and we have a beautiful complement between the sparkle from the stickles as well as the shimmer from those interference inks. For the next card here, I'm just using the eggs here. Now I opted to just do blue eggs and just do 3 of them. You can see that it's a cute card, but it doesn't fill in the area a lot, which is where using some square die cuts to create a mat around it would also be nice. But again, you could also use a couple different colors and have a lot of eggs in a cluster on there, which would be cute. Again, you can flip it and do it a horizontal card and have like a line of a bunch of different eggs. For a little bit of sparkle on here, I used those stickles again, but I used it to create different patterns on each one of the eggs so that they would have some details that are not in your face detail. You kind of have to look at it to see those little bits and details, but it does add some great texture as well as sparkle. For the next one here, I glued down my sentiment first, and this is where I thought I was going to do 1 rainbow, but when I went and laid it down, it just wasn't enough. So we have 3 different rainbows here. I thought it would be cuter to have a cluster of those 3 rainbows. Another addition here I thought would be like a cloud die to have some clouds in between those rainbows, but I didn't want to add too many die sets here. I wanted to share some different ideas to give you some inspiration on different ways to use these sets, but I didn't want to include too many different options or too many different sets. It's easy enough if you didn't happen to have a cloud die to cut out a cloud shape if you really wanted to. Again, just like the other ones, I'm going to do a little bit of stickles on here. So that top rainbow line, I just did a straight line in the center with the stickles. The middle line, I just did some dots, and then the bottom line, I did a straight line through it. So there's a little bit of different texture. It doesn't you still see the colors of each one of those layers of the rainbow. It just adds that texture as well as that sparkle, giving it a little bit more interest. So lastly, we have our shamrocks card here. So I'm going to glue down that sentiment, and then I'm going to create 3 different clusters of the shamrocks, each one of those clusters with a different color as well as a different size. So it's got a little bit of a different look from the hearts from the first one. It's not one big cluster. It's got different little ones here. But again, easy enough to flip this and do a line of a bunch of different shamrocks across a horizontal card as well. And because these are ink blended with that Magic Card and Interference ink, when we tilt it into the light, we still get that green from the color of the ink, but we also get that really pretty purpley shimmer on there as well, which is also going to add some extra interesting texture to it. So once I have these all glued down, I can let that glue dry for just a few moments, and it was really quick and easy to create these cards. These dies don't take up a lot of cardstock, so this is a great option for using up cardstock scraps. It's a great way to use up a bunch. You could get a bunch of different greens, cut a whole bunch of them, and have some really fun shamrock, rainbow, heart, or egg cards, perfect for spring. So the last project I wanted to share was using these flowers as felt flowers as well as the leaves and stems. They are die cut out of felt. However, I'm not going to use them on Fergus or on an egg. I'm going to create a shadow box frame with them. So just because these are intended for going on those 3D eggs, that's what these die sets were from. This was from the 3D eggs and flowers die set. Doesn't mean you have to create eggs with them. I'm going to create that shadow box frame. You could put these on the front of cards if you want. However, it wouldn't be a card that I would put into an envelope. This would be one of those cards that I would hand to someone. but using a 3D frame gives you that dimension and gives you a different way to create some home decor. So I have these die cut for the centers of the daffodils. I use my reverse tweezers to hold the fringe in place while I glued it in place, and then the outer part gets wrapped around that, and then I use those tweezers to hold it in place while that glue is drying. For my leaves, once again, I'm going to stitch them. However, rather than using a knot or rather than taping it down with that Best Ever Craft tape, I leave a tail on it, do my running stitch all the way up, go all the way down, and once I get to the bottom, I'm going to tie those two pieces off in a knot, and then I'm going to use my detail scissors in order to trim that piece off. So this way we have a nice neat knot. The stitching is nice and secure, but I don't have any tape or a knot in the way to start it and to finish it. Just makes it nice and neat that way. Once I have that knot in place and I do a double knot there, I can use my scissors just to trim that floss down to make sure that I don't have any strings of floss. So I'm going to do 2 of these on screen. The rest of them I'm going to do off screen because they're very repetitive. It's exactly the same process for all of them. Again, starting at the bottom, leaving a tail with that floss, going all the way to the top with a running stitch, going all the way back down, filling in those holes, and then doing a double knot with those floss ends and trimming them off. Now, I picked up my shadow box frame at the dollar store, and I chose one that's 5x7 with a white frame around it. Obviously, you can pick and choose exactly what you're wanting to put in it. I have 3 daffodils that I'm doing and 3 tulips. So I did the daffodils in pink for something a little bit different, and then did the tulips in yellow for a bit of a contrast to those daffodils. And I have those layers dried, ready to go. I did a couple of them off screen, and then the daffodil and tulip that I did on screen. So I have those drying, waiting for me. Before we assemble, I need to create the background for my shadow box frame. So I have a piece of hammermill cardstock that I've trimmed down to 5x7 inches. I'm using the Better Press of the Month for February 2026. This is called From Ink to Petal. I'm only using the tulip part of this, and I'm going to hot foil that image onto the hammermill cardstock using some Aurafoil to tie in our gold tulips. So I'm going to position this on the cardstock where I want it to go, use a piece of Best Ever Craft tape to kind of create a hinge so that I can make sure that that plate stays where I want it to go. I accidentally put it the wrong way to begin with, but once I've got this trimmed down, I do realize my mistake and I correct it. You want to have the pretty side of the foil facing the plate, or else you're going to be foiling your plate. So I flipped that over. That hinge made it nice and easy to know that I had it in exactly where I wanted it to go. At this point, my glimmer system is still heating up, but once that green light or that light turns to green, I know it's ready to go and I can press my timer button, but I might as well have my plate heating up on there while I'm waiting for it to warm up. The other thing I'm doing while I'm waiting for it to warm up is I have a piece of scrap hammermill cardstock here. I cut off a piece of the foil, and then I'm going to foil one of the sentiments from that set as well. The sentiments from that set have dies that go with them, so it's going to make a nice, neat die cut foiled sentiment for my frame. I'm also going to solid hot foil the sentiment as well as that background. However, that background is really only going to be used for die cutting pieces for future cards, as to use a specialty cardstock. It's not going to be used in this project. At this point, I'm not sure if I'm going to be using the foiled sentiment or the solid hot foiled sentiment, so I always like to do it both ways so that I have options. Sometimes the regular sentiment is the one that works best, and sometimes the solid hot foiled sentiment is the one that pops off more. So once I have my foiling done, I have my solid hot foil plate on there. I'm going to solid hot foil them. In the end, I choose the regular foiled sentiment, and the solid hot foiled one, I just glue it underneath my sentiment just to give it a little bit more dimension. But again, it's always nice to have that solid hot foiling so you can use up that excess of the foil and have it as specialty cardstock or to use for different elements for your cards. Now, I chose to hot foil with the Aurafoil because it's gold. It's going to coordinate nicely with the yellow tulips, but it has a holographic shine to it that coordinates really well with other colors in the project. So you could also use just regular gold foil if you wanted, but I chose the Aura because of the shine that you get with all of the other colors in there. I thought it was going to coordinate a little bit better. So that tulip design is going to go in the background behind my felt pieces. It's just going to give some more interest to that background as well as add some shine to it. So with those sentiments done, ready to go, I can set that off to the side. And the last step here for my background is I need to do a little bit of ink blending on it. I love the foiled tulips, but they're a little bit too plain. I want to add a little bit of ink to them. So this is the frame that I got from the dollar store. It does have a piece of glass in it. I take the glass out because I don't think that glass is going to give it enough dimension. So I pop that off to the side. I can use it for something else. So now my frame is ready once it's done. I take my sticky mat out and I'm going to do my ink blending first with some tumbled glass distress ink. After I have some blue in that background, I'm going to use some Uncharted Mariner around the outside edges. For the greens toward the bottom, I just used bundled sage. You could add an extra green if you wanted to have a little bit of a darker edge to it. I didn't really feel that it needed it though. The blues and the greens in the background are just going to add a little bit of background to it. It's not really adding any detail to it. It's just so that we don't have our pieces onto a white background, but I didn't want to do the foiling on blue cardstock because then those tulips in the background are going to be blue. So when I'm doing my ink blending here, I am avoiding those tulips. I'm just doing the background sky areas, but we still have those tulip shapes there. And I opt not to color them, but you definitely could, if you wanted to color them, you could just use some markers and quickly fill them in. I wanted that detail there, but I wanted the focus to be the felt flowers that I'm going to have in the front there. So I didn't feel that I needed to add that detail in the background. Once our background here is done, I have the mat from the frame. I'm going to glue this piece right to that mat so that it is kind of anchored in there. It's going to hold that in there. This particular frame has two different mats to it. There's kind of a front mat and a back mat. This is the back mat. I want to make sure, again, that we have some space in that frame. So we still get the dimension from the felt flowers and everything, but I'm not putting it too close to the front of the frame so it's not kind of going past the front part of that frame. Once I have that glued on there while it's drying, I can start laying out my flowers here. So these flowers are all done with felt. The leaves as well as the stems are also done with felt. Now the great thing about those stems being done with felt is you can also curve them if you want. I'm using that same liquid glue that I use for pretty much anything. The one thing with felt though is you do need to give it a little bit of extra time in order for that to dry. It will dry totally fine. It'll be nice and secure, but because that felt wants to absorb the glue first before it starts to set, you do need to give it just a little bit of extra time. While I'm placing these, I'm kind of paying attention to the pattern on the back, that foiled pattern there, and trying to place our flowers so they're not really covering that. They kind of look like they're part of the arrangement. Once I have my flowers in place, we can fill in the different areas with the leaves. I'm using the same glue to glue all of these pieces down. And once they're glued down, I'm really just leaving them to be while that glue sets. Once I have the leaves for those daffodils down, I can start gluing these stems for the tulips in the foreground. So when it comes to putting those tulips down, I'm going to kind of have them in between the areas where those daffodils are, but a little bit farther down. Don't want them all to be the same height. I want them to look like the tulips are in front of the daffodils. I chose the tulips in front of the daffodils because they're flatter. The daffodils obviously have the dimension from those pieces that are rolled up in front of it. So I wanted to have that dimension in the back and then have different things on the front of it. So just like the daffodils, I'm doing the stems for the tulips first. Then I'm gluing down those the bloom heads, and then I'm filling in the different areas with those leaves. There's two different shaped leaves, one that kind of goes to the front or to the right, one that kind of goes to the left. However, I'm not putting all of the leaves for all three of the tulips in exactly the same position. I think I never like it when it looks like it's copied and pasted. So I do mix and match them, putting some of them in different angles as well as flopping them so we don't have all exactly the same pieces on the right as well as on the left to make it a little bit more interesting. So at this point I can pick and choose which sentiment I want, and the solid hot foiled sentiment was just too much. It was too flashy. To me, it was a little bit too distracting. So I glued that to the back of it. If you didn't want to use it up, if you wanted to save it for another project, you could use the coordinating die for that sentiment and just cut some solid cardstock to glue to the back for that extra dimension. So I put my acrylic block on there and let that dry for a few moments so that the glue was holding everything down nice and securely before adding it to the shadow box frame. Now I chose a really simple shadow box frame here that didn't have a lot of color to it. you definitely could choose something a little bit more dramatic. The dollar store that I went to had a white one and a black one, and I thought for spring that black would be a little bit too stark. But you could also take that white mat on the inside there and use some gold specialty cardstock for that. If you wanted to tie in those golds there, I think that would be a great way to do it. Then we have our little mini cards with the embellishments or with the pieces from the spring embellishments die set. A great way to use them to create some fun things. Even gift tags I think would be really fun with these to add as little embellishment pieces. But by adding or by ink blending with those interference inks, it gives them a lot more interest because we have that shimmer to them, and it shimmers with a little bit of a different color. It just adds some visual interest as well as the sparkle that we get from the stickles. Again, this is just to give you some different ideas on ways to use these dies in a way that isn't necessarily how they were intended to be used. They definitely can be used to create the felt Fergus as well as the adorable egg, but it's always fun to know more and more ways to use them. Then we have our felt egg here with those little flowers on the side. Again, perfect for spring. This is perfect for creating just some adorable decor in your home. You'll find everything that I used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.